left today to go up that look like almost comparable to last week. And that's pretty exciting when you see that many young children in church. My wife posted a picture of our calico cat named Gabby. I always give people a middle name, and I give Gabby Lynn as her full name. She's 20 years old. She has been a pretty nice cat, a good cat for a long time. I'm surprised she's still living as long as she has. She is now a little bit senile, and she's very hard of hearing. You can kind of sneak up on her really easily and just scare her to death by doing so. But we have another cat, too, and that cat's name is Dooley. He's just kind of a big old black alley cat we rescued from a humane shelter. And he is quite a bit bigger than Gabby is, and he's really gotten to be a pretty heavy cat. And at mealtime, he is so selfish. We've got 2 bowls down, and we'll put the cat food in each bowl. But as we're starting to feed the cats, he will bulldoze Gabby out of the way. And so he always has to eat first. And he's also a very fast eater. And when he gets through eating, he'll bulldoze her away, and he'll eat the leftovers that she's got in her bowl. And so we kind of have to separate, kind of learn that we've got to put their bowls of food in different rooms. Otherwise, he will just, take advantage of her. Poor old Gabby. We would call that a kind of extreme selfishness on the black cat to mistreat the other calico like that. He could care less whether she had anything to eat or not, as long as he gets all that he wants to eat. Well, we call selfishness can be defined as when your needs trump anybody else's needs. And you always do what you want as opposed to what may be in someone else's best interest. I think it's a part of our genetic makeup. I think this selfishness just runs through our genetic makeup as people have been that way for a long time. I can remember when I was in 7th grade or 8th grade, we had a large junior high school, and my class was on the 3rd floor, and when the lunch bell would ring, of course, you're not supposed to run in the hallways, which we did if a teacher wasn't looking. But we would run as fast as we could to the stairway, down 3 flights of stairs, the length of the hallway to the cafeteria. So we would beat other people, so we would get in the line first, and we wouldn't have to wait. Selfishness. It starts really early. Behavioral psychologists might call this kind of selfishness a self-preservation instinct. It goes way back when maybe the caveman days, when you never knew if you were going to have enough of anything. And so people kind of act out of that instinctual selfishness. They try to gather as much around them as we possibly can. I kind of jokingly say there must be a million individual items just in our garage. But if you go throughout the house, in every drawer in a dresser, it's just packed with stuff. Kitchen cabinets are full of stuff. The desks are full of stuff. The closets are full of stuff. We have more stuff than we could possibly use. It seems like, yet we don't want to get rid of very much. Overeating, some people say. Some people overeat and become obese or overeating because it goes back again to that instinct. Back in the caveman days, they may think that you never knew when your next meal was going to come. And so if you had a lot to eat in front of you, you would just eat as much as you possibly could because you might not eat again for 3 days. And so this kind of built into our genetic makeup, when there is food available, we'll just pack it in because we might not have anything to eat tomorrow. That's not really realistic. But they say that may be something that's kind of driving people to eat really more than they need to. The self-preservation instinct pretty much says, I've got to worry about me instead of you. I'll worry about me, you worry about you. And yet, Jesus taught us just the opposite. He taught us not to be selfish, but to share generously, especially with those who don't have as much. If you have 2 cloaks and your neighbor doesn't have any, then give him one of your cloaks. You still have one. And you remember that famous story talked about the very wealthy man that we kind of call Dives, which means rich man. He had so much money that every time he sat down to eat, there was far more to eat than he could possibly eat. It was like a huge banquet. Now, just outside of his house was a very poor beggar who was sick, and he was really starving to death. Now, the rich man would eat all that he could, and there would be lots of food left over, but it never entered his mind to share even his leftovers with the guy who's starving right outside his door. That's extreme selfishness. And Jesus said, that man's going to hell. Because he could have shared, he had the opportunity to share, he had more than enough, and he refused to share with someone who was starving to death. In our Christian religion, selfishness is not a virtue, it is a sin. So I want to go back and look at the parable that Debbie read for us this morning. And it comes into a section where Jesus is giving some pretty serious teachings. And part of the teachings have to do with, there's like three things that lead up to this parable. One of those things, he says, in terms of the Pharisees, don't take the yeast of the Pharisees into yourself, or beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. The yeast of the Pharisees was this: their actions didn't match their teachings. They lived very differently than how they taught other people. So Jesus would say, the Pharisees, do what they teach, but don't do what they do. That's the yeast of the Pharisees. They are inconsistent. Their behavior doesn't match their teachings. Then he encouraged the followers of Jesus to be courageous. When times come where you need to have courage and stand up for your belief in Jesus Christ, realize that courage, and God will help you. He'll give you the words that you need in those situations like that. And then he also said, now don't worry about those who can kill the body, which would be in reference to the Jewish leaders, but probably also the Romans who were occupying their land. Don't worry about the people who can kill the body. Be more worried about God and where you will spend eternity, as opposed to worrying about those who seem to have strength and power over you. Now, he's going through each of these teachings, and then someone begins to raise their hand. Finally says, okay, what is it? You've got a question for me. And the guy says, teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Kind of came out of the blue. Had nothing to do with what Jesus was teaching. Probably it goes in reference that the older brother would get 2/3 of the estate, and then the younger brothers would divide up the remaining third, coming from that action. But it had nothing to do with what Jesus was teaching. He just was kind of focused on, he had to tell Jesus this question. And so Jesus' answer is, man, who appointed me as judge or referee between you and your brother? Watch out. Guard yourself against all kinds of greed. After all, one's life isn't determined by one's possessions, even when someone is very wealthy. Now, I want to emphasize that again, because I think it's really true. One's life isn't determined by how much one has, even when someone is very wealthy. And yet I think we do determine status in our world by the quality of what people have and how much of what they have. And Jesus, don't measure people by what they possess. And then he tells them the story of this rich man. This rich man was a farmer. He had a lot of farmland. And this particular growing season, it was like the perfect, ideal growing conditions. Plenty of rain coming at the right time, not too hot, not too cold. And so when the harvest comes, his crops have done so well that he can't get all the harvest into his barns. And so he's thinking, what am I going to do with all this excess? I don't even have enough room to put it. Well, I know what I'm going to do. I will build bigger barns, and I'll put it in those bigger barns. He never thought, well, maybe it might be a nice thing to do to give some of my excess to people whose crops maybe didn't do as well, or maybe they're hungry, maybe they have plenty of storage, and I'll just share out of my excess. He never considered that. And so Jesus says of this particular person, you fool, tonight you will die. Now who will get the things you have prepared for yourself? This is the way it will be for those who hoard things for themselves and are not rich towards God. So here's the farmer. He's taking all of that excess. And instead of sharing, he builds bigger barns to put all the excess in, thinking, I won't have to work so hard. Maybe for a few years. Like I've got so much, it's going to tide me over. But he's going to die that very night, Jesus says. And then all that excess will mean nothing. Get the message here. Be rich toward God. Someone said of this little parable that it should be called the parable of the eye, because the I word is used over and over again. Let me read that to you, and just listen, see how many times you hear the word I or I'll. Then he told them a parable. A certain rich man's land produced a bountiful crop. He said to himself, what will I do? I have no place to store my harvest. Then he thought, here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. That's where I'll store all my grain and goods. I. Someone said that when Jesus came, he came to banish the words I and mine and replace them with we and ours. The self-centered person always thinks of themselves first, and sometimes even in church. I want this. I don't like that. I want it to be this way. I like the way that it used to be. I. The rich fool thought only of this world. What can I amass to take care of my needs in this world? But was unprepared for the kingdom. He thought only of the moment, only of this present life, not the life beyond. And he forgot about his neighbors and their needs. I remember a long time ago seeing a cartoon, kind of like an editorial cartoon, and showed a hearse on the way to a cemetery. And the hearse was pulling a U-Haul trailer with all of the things that the guy who had died wanted to take with him to the cemetery. Well, you know the old adage, we can't take it with us. That's exactly true. We're going to leave everything behind. We came into this world without anything, and we shall leave this world without anything as well. You know, there's nothing really wrong with wealth. The Bible doesn't condemn wealth. The Bible doesn't condemn success. I think it would even encourage those things. But it does put a responsibility upon those who have a lot, that they take what they have and use it wisely and use it generously. I wanted to share some figures with you this morning about some philanthropists. I kind of looked up the other day the top 50 philanthropists in the United States. And it's kind of interesting. Have you heard of Leo and Kay Drey? It's either Dre or Dry. They're from Missouri, and he's been in the forest industry for a long time. He gave the state of Missouri just recently a piece of property or properties that valued $180 million. Just gave it to the state of Missouri. What a nice and generous thing to do. Larry Ellison, who is the CEO of Oracle, has given $193 million to medical science. Isn't that amazing that he even has enough money like that to give that much money away? George Lucas, Star Wars fame, director, gave $196 million to the University of Southern California. I bet they appreciate that gift. Oprah Winfrey, I don't much care for her spiritual direction, but she's given to charity $263 million. That's a lot of money. Ted Turner, founder of CNN, has given $389 million to environmental causes. Very nice. Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, head of Bloomberg News and a bunch of other things, has given to charity $584 million. The Walton family, not to be confused with John Boy and Walton's Mountain, has given $1.5 billion to charity. $1.5 billion. Bill and Melinda Gates have given to the Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, $3.5 billion in charitable giving. And they pale by comparison to Warren Buffett. Are you ready for this? $41 billion to charity. That's amazing. That's generous. What a nice thing that is. These people who are very, very wealthy are also very, very generous. And they've taken the resources they've had and they've put them to places that can do great good. Things that interest them, from medical science to environmental concerns to educational institutions. What a wonderful thing. When Jesus stressed the second great commandment, to love our neighbor as much as we love ourselves, there could be nothing in that commandment that should be selfish. Because when we are selfish, we're almost immediately beginning to fail in observing the second great commandment, which is to love the other person as much as we love ourselves. So that should be a guiding principle for all Christians. The second great commandment. How do we live? How do we interact with other people? It's inside the church, outside the church, wherever. We are guided by the commandment to love our neighbor as much as we love ourselves. You know, there are some things that, whenever you get a lot of people together, like in a church, you're going to have some differences of opinion. There's going to be differences of what people like and what they don't like. But I think the guiding principle of the church should be, we should be asking ourselves, what is the greatest good for the greatest number of people? That's what the church needs to be addressing. What ought we to do? What can we do for the greatest good for the greatest number of people? And underlying that guiding principle is another one. And this is kind of hard to grasp a little bit, but the church exists for people who are not here yet. But because of the things that we're going to be trying to do, we hope more people will come. And the more people who come, hopefully more people will have a saving relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ, because we're trying to fulfill that great commission to make disciples for Jesus Christ. What changes can and should we make, the church ought to be asking, that can bring more people to faith in Jesus Christ? Now, those kind of guiding principles, what is the greatest good for the greatest number of people, that the church exists for people who aren't even here yet, and what changes can and should we make that can bring more people to Christ, those are very healthy things that the church should be focused upon. But there are some unhealthy ones as well. And those kind of pop up sometimes more frequently than we would even hope and pray. I have been told by my district superintendent that there are some churches, probably even beyond the Methodist Church, their attitude is, I would rather see the church die than see the church make changes to keep from dying. Isn't that a horrible attitude? You are so stuck in the way things always have been that you don't mind if the church ceases to exist, so you won't have to confront change. Sometimes we hear a lot of things in the church where people say, I don't like that, as if you ought not to do it. If I don't like it, you shouldn't do it. Or, this is just taking way too long for me, and I am tired of waiting. Either they do it soon, or I'm walking. We had a Ministerial Alliance meeting this week, and one of the ministers relayed that one of his parishioners said this. It's a church, by the way, that needs to change. I'm not going to be here much longer. You can do what you want after I'm gone. It's kind of funny, but it's kind of sad too, isn't it? Don't make any changes while I'm still here. But when I'm no longer here, then you can do whatever you want to do. That's a very self-centered attitude. Those comments sound a lot like the rich fool comments. I will build bigger barns to store all my stuff just for me. just for me. Had another conversation, become an interesting week. Another minister came in, former pastor of a church here in town. I'm not sure really why he came in to visit with me, maybe more just needed to talk to somebody. And he said that he had 200 people had left his church to go to another church. And the ones who left because they thought that their church ought to have a service like this, like we just started here a few weeks ago. And the elders, the deacons, whoever makes those decisions said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't need that kind of a change. This is how we worship, and this is how our sanctuary is set up, and so, no, we're not going to do that. And so they just walked away. They walked away from the church. Now, I look at that, and I see selfishness all the way around. I don't know about you. But to those who said we're never going to change, even though we've got a lot of young people who said, this would be good for our church if we did something like this, they say, well, we're not going to do that. That may be selfishness on the governing body of the church. But then on the other side, those who say, well, if you're not going to do what I want to do, what I think is necessary to do, then we're leaving. Do you see how the I kind of creeps into both sides of that situation? It's all about what I want, and I want it now. I'm impatient. I don't want to wait. If I don't get my way, then we're leaving. Or, I like things just the way they are. We're not going to change. Now, in a church, when you have differences of opinion, you need to come together and work with each other and find that common ground, find the compromise that works out solutions to problems like that. So Jesus, the bottom line in this parable, which had a lot to do with greed and selfishness, the bottom line is that we need to be rich towards God instead of ourselves. And that needs to be the attitude that our church and every church ought to have. How can we be rich towards God and do the right thing for the greatest number of people that ensures the fulfillment of the Great Commission to bring more people here, more people into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ? Selfishness is a part of our makeup. It is so deeply ingrained. It's really a part of our fallen nature. That nature that's not a part of how God created us to be. It's something that we all contend with. But we need to be aware of it. We need to look at our attitudes and our actions. Is it all about what I want and what I need? Or is it, and can it be, what's in the greatest good for the greatest number of people? Would you bow your heads?